Israel at war, what it means for the Middle East and what President Trump is saying about it. We're going to unpack the weekend's No Kings protest in the left's latest ploy to profit off of climate hysteria. All of that and so much more today on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Israel's military says Iran launched more than 100 drones targeting Israel after the Israelis carried out what it called a precise and coordinated preemptive strike targeting Iran's nuclear program.
As President Trump heads to Canada for the G7, Israel and Iran are now in open war. Over the weekend, Israel began a surgical operation to destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure, their military command structure, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, high-ranking intelligence leaders, and a number of nuclear scientists who were working to develop Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken extensively to American media about what led up to this moment.
Because we were facing an imminent threat, a dual existential threat. One, the threat of Iran rushing to weaponize their enriched uranium to make atomic bombs with a specific and declared intent to destroy us. Second, a rush to increase their ballistic missile arsenal.
While President Trump has made clear that America was not involved in that initial attack, President Trump has made clear that Iran had a lengthy opportunity to make a deal to avoid this situation. They also have continued to develop their own nuclear potential, something that President Trump has long consistently said was not an acceptable outcome. And he's also made clear that should Iran attack America in any way while this is being carried out, they will pay heavy consequences for it, as military assets are already being moved into the Middle East. Over the weekend, there were protests in major cities around the country carrying the theme of No Kings. The messaging there is a little bit difficult for normal people to follow. Some have criticized it as being a far too online message for protests. And if you look at the sponsors and organizers of this protest on the No Kings website, you'll understand why. Not only is it a list of teachers unions, anti-Doge unions, but also a number of major left-wing dark money groups who all have different interests. And so one challenge here for this movement is to try and synthesize what their message is into one thing besides just being anti-Trump. But always on 10-Minute Drill, we like to follow the money. And as you look at some of the top names in this, you'll see a group, Families Over Billionaires, one of the first build groups on their website. We've talked before about Families Over Billionaires. They were created to pretend to be this populist, family-driven effort against conservatives spending too much money to help billionaires. But ironically, Families Over Billionaires is a front group for a small group of left-wing billionaires, including foreign billionaire Hans-Jörg Wyss. So again, to synthesize that, the left has created a fake group, Families Over Billionaires, for their small group of billionaires to try and push over and overcome the popular political will from the November election on things like immigration enforcement, making our neighborhoods safer, cutting fraud, waste, and abuse in government with Doge, things like that. Again, small group of foreign billionaires, including Hans-Jörg Wyss, who's been accused multiple times of sexual harassment. I would love to know how many people at these protests knew that it was being organized and funded. These protests just don't come out of thin air. They have to be marketed, there has to be outreach, and there has to be organization. That was in large part funded by a serial sexual harasser from a foreign country attempting to manipulate American politics. This is what Sheldon Whitehouse tweeted about the No Kings protest, invoking the imagery of Tank Man, the singular protester who stood up to a line of tanks after the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. Now, when you understand that these No Kings protests are largely astroturfed, left-wing dark money activities from foreign billionaires, you understand just how offensive it is to compare what they are doing to Tank Man in the actual stand against totalitarianism and power in that way. But another face at these No Kings rallies was Randi Weingarten, one of our favorites.
And together we build a future of opportunity and justice for all. Hope over fear, aspiration over anger,
Once again, Randi never fails to entertain. But over the weekend, she also announced she was stepping down from her leadership position within the Democrat National Committee. To a lot of people, it's a big surprise to see that one of the leaders of America's top teachers unions simultaneously held a role within the DNC. For one thing, it definitely destroys any air of separation between teachers unions and Democrat politics. But it also is a very good reminder of why Democrats have been so opposed to any actual reforms to public education, because they literally have built infrastructure within their own party with teachers unions to ensure those things never get fixed. Over the weekend, President Trump called for a pause in immigration raids and ICE raids at hotels, farms, and other hospitality places, citing a concern about the impact that might have on the economy and on those very particular industries. There is some concern that creating new carve-outs in immigration enforcement might make new sanctuaries, but the goal here really is to focus the enforcement efforts on the worst first, which is what the administration has built their ICE enforcement plans around, that we should first work on getting violent criminal illegal immigrants out of major American cities. You'll remember in Los Angeles, they focused those raids really on a list that DHS put out with detailed rap sheets highlighting just who they were going after. Murderers, rapists, a number of different violent criminals with really horrific records that needed to be taken out of these cities to make our neighborhoods safe again. That's what they're going to continue to focus on, and that's the new effort here to prioritize. As we talk about these Los Angeles riots, it's important once again to follow the money. There's been a lot of reporting and now a Senate investigation into the left-wing groups that are supporting these rioters. One group specifically, called the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of California, CHRPA, is a group that has gotten tens of millions of dollars in grants, both from DHS and from the state of California. That group now has been heavily involved in helping illegal immigrants avoid ICE raids. They have sent out warnings to figure out where enforcement actions were coming. So again, you have to look at the full cycle of this. DHS gave grant money to an organization that now is helping illegal immigrants avoid DHS and ICE enforcement. It goes back to this larger issue that we've talked about how Democrats have used taxpayer money to create infrastructure around their political priorities that are actually incredibly detrimental to the country overall. On the big beautiful bill, as Republicans march toward the critical July 4th deadline, one issue that continues to come up is Medicaid. Democrats have recently begun bringing out patients to talk about how the Republican bill might impact specific populations.
Charlie does not speak, so I'm going to speak on behalf of him. It is because of Medicaid, Charlie, who just recently began walking, is able to run across the playground.
Senator Klobuchar is bringing out a very sympathetic person, a disabled person, to say they're at risk under the Republican bill. But what really is happening here is something that we talked about last week. That disabled person is having much more trouble getting access to care through Medicaid because Democrats like Amy Klobuchar are making them compete for Medicaid benefits against both illegal immigrants and, as we talked about last week, men in their 20s and 30s who are spending their days playing video games instead of looking for work. Now, no offense to men sitting in their underwear playing video games at home, but we have now heard numerous stories of people with actual critical conditions who need care who simply can't get it because the program as it stands now favors those able-bodied men on their couches playing video games for more than 4 hours a day over people with actual disabilities and major challenges. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal about a father who said, "My son desperately needs these work requirements so that he can get care because when he applied for in-home care because of his severe autism, he was told it would take 10 years. Again, because he's competing against able-bodied men playing video games on their couches and illegal immigrants. So as you see Amy Klobuchar and Democrats talk about risk to disabled populations, the greater risk is not passing these reforms and making the program work better for those people who actually need it. Last week, Politico reported on a new left-wing dark money effort to treat climate change like gun violence. The same people who turned parents' fears over gun violence and school shootings into a gigantic money-making operation for Democrats, with groups like Moms Demand Action and Everytown, have now turned their focus to climate change in an effort to make people believe that bad weather events that they suffer are the result of climate change, which are the result of energy companies over the years creating oil and gas and things like that. This effort is offensive for a number of reasons, but one that bothers me the most is they made this launch around the LA wildfires, claiming that climate change caused bad weather events that led to the dryness that led to the LA wildfires that's now leaving these people homeless in Los Angeles. We know in reality that mismanagement around these forests led to those LA wildfires, and mismanagement in the response let those wildfires burn out of control. And then thirdly, mismanagement around the rebuild is creating a red tape situation where it's going to take over 400 years for that to ever be rebuilt. Letting Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom off the hook for this is the wrong move, and people should see right through it. These groups are trying to say energy companies did this. It's silly and outrageous and offensive, but once again, a reminder that left-wing dark money groups see children, using children as props, as their best way to try and kill the energy resources that we rely on in this country every day. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us on 10 Minute Drill. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends. We'll see you next time.